Welcome back to Management Voice, the audio edition. In our first episode, we heard from TMA's leadership, the president, the secretary, and the editor, each sharing their vision for the year ahead. Today, we move deeper into the magazine itself. This episode brings us two articles that, at first glance, might seem worlds apart. One about gold, the other about energy. But read them together, and a theme emerges: resilience. How does India respond when the ground shifts beneath it? When trade routes close, when oil prices spike, when the global economy turns uncertain? Mr. VP Nandakumar takes us through the recent US tariff escalations and explains why, in moments of disruption, India turns to the one asset it's trusted for centuries: gold. Engineer George Paul examines India's energy landscape, where most of our fuel comes from abroad, and maps out both the vulnerabilities and the pathways forward. Two different challenges, one underlying question: how do we keep moving when the world around us doesn't? Let's begin. Trade headwinds and the power of gold. Mr. VP Nandakumar opens his article with a moment that shifted the ground beneath India's exporters. August 27th. US President Donald Trump announces tariffs on Indian imports will double, rising as high as 50% in some cases. For two democracies that had spent recent decades building strategic and economic partnership, Mr. Nandakumar writes, this was a sharp setback. And the implications arrived immediately. Higher tariffs don't just change numbers on a spreadsheet. They make Indian goods less competitive. Demand falls. Export revenues decline. The scale? Roughly 2/3 of India's $86.5 billion in exports to the United States now facing new duties. Shrimp from coastal towns, leather from Tamil Nadu, carpets, apparel, textiles from the heartland, gems and jewelry that employ entire districts, metals, machinery, furniture. Many of these industries are labor-intensive. Job losses in one factory ripple outward to suppliers, transporters, families. Economists estimate the tariff shock could trim 0.2 to 0.5 percentage points from India's GDP growth, pulling projections down from 6.5% to around 6%. The MSME sector, backbone of textiles, marine products, handicrafts, is especially exposed. And then there's the competition. Vietnam, Bangladesh, nations with lower tariff barriers, are positioned to capture the market share India might lose. So what does India do? Mr. Nandakumar maps out the response on two fronts. Externally, India must accelerate its network of trade agreements. The recent pact with the United Kingdom is a start, but the priority now is expansion. Into the Middle East, ASEAN, Latin America, Africa, new markets, high-growth regions, diversification away from dependence on any single economy. Domestically, the focus turns to competitiveness. The production-linked incentive scheme has already proven itself, generating over 5.3 lakh crore rupees in exports, creating more than 1.1 million jobs across 14 industries. Mr. Nandakumar argues for extending PLI to the sectors now under tariff pressure: apparel, leather, pharma. Combine that with infrastructure investment, digitalization, stronger logistics, and India can position itself as a manufacturing hub built not just for scale but for resilience. He also points to India's services and digital economy, less vulnerable to tariff walls, still showing robust growth. And on the demand side, there's reason for optimism: a strong monsoon, a favorable Kharif harvest. Both signal rising rural consumption. Policies that strengthen rural purchasing power, Mr. Nandakumar writes, can help cushion the economy when exports slow. But amid all this policy and strategy, something quieter has been happening. Gold prices have been rising. Globally, tariff disputes and recession fears have sent investors towards safe havens. Gold hit record highs. In India, the rupee's depreciation magnified those gains even further. For households, this means wealth security. The gold in the locker is worth more. But for businesses, especially small ones, it means something more immediate: liquidity. MSMEs often have limited access to formal credit. Banks are cautious. Credit lines tighten during uncertain times. Gold becomes the bridge. With regulated gold loan institutions, licensed BFCS, banks, a business can walk in with collateral and walk out with working capital. Not in weeks, in hours. Rising gold values mean stronger collateral, more liquidity, cash flow that keeps operations alive, workers paid, supply chains moving. Mr. Nandakumar's point is clear. Gold isn't just sitting idle in households. It's being activated, turned from a static asset into dynamic capital. This, he writes, is what formalization has achieved. Where informal money lenders once dominated, licensed institutions now bring regulation, transparency, trust, financial empowerment. That's what he calls it. The transformation of household gold into a tool that sustains entrepreneurial resilience across the country. Mr. Nandakumar's conclusion holds both the challenge and the path forward. The tariff escalation is a stern reminder of vulnerabilities. India's export-dependent sectors need protection. Through policy reforms, expanded trade partnerships, stronger domestic demand. But at the same time, he writes, India's long-standing relationship with gold has once again proven its worth. Not just as a store of wealth for households, but as a dependable source of credit that enables small enterprises to weather external storms. In balancing diplomacy, reform, and financial resilience, India can turn challenge into transformation. Fueling growth, India's energy dependence and opportunity. Based on the article by engineer George Paul, former Executive Director, BPCL. Every sunrise over India lights 1.45 billion individual days. Each one begins with a silent dependence on fuel drawn from wells, pipelines, and cargoes that travel across continents. Mr. George Paul poses a question at the heart of his article. Can India secure enough affordable and sustainable energy to fuel its growth story? India's energy system, he writes, continues to be dominated by fossil fuels. Coal and oil together account for nearly 88% of the primary energy supply. Coal remains the backbone of electricity generation, often supplying more than 60% of power during non-solar hours and surging as high as 75% in post-monsoon months. Oil fuels, transport, petrochemicals, and industrial activity. Clean energy investment is growing rapidly. In 2023, clean energy spending was nearly twice that of fossil fuels. But renewables, Mr. Paul notes, are not yet able to displace coal and oil in the short term due to storage limitations, transmission constraints, and the intermittency of solar and wind. India's energy transition, he writes, is best described as accelerating but uneven. And then there's the import dependence. In fiscal year 25, imports covered more than 88% of India's total crude oil requirements, amounting to about 242 million tons. The Indian basket crude price, which averaged around $68 per barrel in August 2025, directly determines India's import bill. The annual oil import expenditure is estimated at $130 to $140 billion, making crude one of the largest drains on India's foreign exchange reserves. Monthly net oil and gas imports hover around $9 to $11 billion, a figure that moves in tandem with global prices. This, Mr. Paul writes, exposes the economy to external shocks. A sudden price increase or supply disruption can quickly worsen India's current account deficit, put downward pressure on the rupee, and trigger inflationary trends across the economy. Energy, he reminds us, is not a backdrop to growth. It is its bloodstream. Securing it is not just an industrial objective, but a national imperative. Geopolitics has added new layers of complexity. Since 2022, India has significantly increased its intake of discounted Russian crude, which offered relief from high global oil prices. Russian oil became a critical component of India's energy mix, especially as domestic demand rose. But recent developments, particularly the imposition of US tariffs of up to 25 to 50% on certain Indian exports linked to Russian oil trade, along with tighter sanctions enforcement under the Trump administration, have made this reliance more precarious. Stricter monitoring of shipping, insurance, and payments threatens the viability of these discounts. If India were forced to curtail its purchases of Russian crude, analysts estimate that the annual import bill could rise by an additional $9 to $11 billion. Engineer. Paul is clear. The dependence on imported oil makes India vulnerable not just to market cycles, but to geopolitical disputes in which it has little control. So, what's the path forward? Mr. Paul argues that energy security must move from aspiration to strategy. In the short term, he calls for diversification in sourcing, expanding supply from the Middle East, the United States, and Latin America to reduce over-reliance on any single country. Flexibility in refineries so they can process multiple grades of crude is essential. Active financial hedging, using instruments to protect against both crude price volatility and currency swings, can shield the economy from sudden shocks. Building strategic reserves during periods of low prices can act as a buffer against future disruptions. And improving efficiency, especially in transport and electricity distribution, can provide quick savings in oil and gas consumption. Preparedness, he writes, is the only true insurance against volatility. In the long term, Mr. Paul recognizes the transformation already underway. Renewables, solar, wind, and biofuels are no longer peripheral to India's plans. They are central to its path forward, accelerating investment in renewable energy with better integration into transmission corridors and advanced forecasting will make these sources more reliable. Coal will remain necessary for base load power, but India must invest in cleaner technologies and the phased retirement of older plants. Natural gas can serve as a bridge fuel. Expanding LNG imports and domestic gas development can provide a cleaner alternative to oil in transport and industry. Transforming the transport sector, scaling electric mobility, expanding ethanol blending to E20, and promoting biofuels will progressively reduce oil demand growth. And investing in domestic exploration and new technologies, enhanced oil recovery, biogas, hydrogen, and carbon capture can reduce long-term dependence on imported fuels. Every new megawatt generated domestically is a small act of self-reliance, a move toward an energy mix that balances necessity with responsibility. His tone remains realistic but hopeful. India cannot isolate itself from global markets, but it can strengthen its foundations. Energy independence will take time. Energy preparedness can begin now. He closes his article with a clear message. Resilience in energy is not about cutting connections, but about building capability, so that progress does not pause when supply lines falter. Between the gold that steadies our households and the energy that fuels our industries lies the story of Indian resilience. One draws from heritage, the other from innovation. Together, they form the rhythm of continuity that keeps the nation moving forward. Our thanks to Mr. VP Nandakumar and engineer George Paul for their insightful contributions to this issue of Management Voice. We also extend our gratitude to the partners and advertisers whose support makes this edition possible. Bath & Beyond, JMJ Fintech Limited, Forms Builders, Kalyan Mobikes, Dhanlakshmi Bank, Double Horse, Sonnet Advertising, and Vaidya Ratnam. Your continued association helps Management Voice grow, evolve, and reach new audiences, in print and now in sound. In our next episode, we look outward to the global forces that influence India's trajectory, interest rates, trade policy, and the ever-relevant question of reform. You've been listening to Management Voice, the audio edition, brought to you by the Thrissur Management Association. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected.